Yá'át'ééh. Good morning, my relatives. Hello, this is Mark Charles. It is Thursday, April 4th, and it's just coming up on noon. I think I started this live stream just before noon Eastern time, so I still wanted to say Yá'át'ééh. I'm sitting down with my second cup of coffee. I invite you to grab your favorite cup or mug of your favorite hot morning beverage or cold morning beverage and join me. There's a few things I want to talk about today. But before I begin, I want to do like I always do, which is acknowledge I'm talking to you from Washington, D.C. My people, the Navajo people, call it Washington, and it's the land of the Piscataway. They're the nation that were living here and hunting here, farming here, and fishing here long before Columbus got lost at sea, and they're still here. I want to honor the Piscataway as the hosts of the land where I'm living. I want to thank them for their stewardship of these lands, and I want to just state how humbled I am to be living on these lands today. Let me see who's on with me this morning. So I know a few of you. Let me just see who's jumping on with us this morning. Who's on the chat? Jermaine, Yá'át'ééh. Good morning. It's good to have you join me this morning. Thanks for being online. I know there's a few other people online with me as I get going this morning. So when I sat down this morning and if you watch my social media, you'll see I actually posted out on my social media that I was working on my second cup of coffee and I was trying to bring my thoughts together around what I wanted to talk about this morning. And there were two articles that I saw over the past few days that I wanted to discuss. The first one is tragic, right? We all have heard the news. I'm going to share this with you right now. But earlier this week in Gaza, Israel attacked 7 aid workers from the World Central Kitchen and bombed their car multiple times, literally killing them. And it was a devastating act. It was a horrific act. And it's been all over the news and people have been talking about it. And it's been ironic, even as our nation has been sharing outrage about it, yet we still continue to militarily support Israel. And so it's like, yeah, we support their war, but we're outraged at what they're doing in their war. And our hypocrisy is being demonstrated to the world, where we have no integrity to call for peace in Gaza because we're literally funding the nation that is doing these horrific acts. And we don't have the political courage to say anything publicly or to pull back our support. And so, yeah, our hypocrisy is being demonstrated to the entire globe. And so I knew we had to talk about this, and I'm not going to brush over this, but I wanted to make sure this was one of the articles I wanted to talk about today. The second was a much lighter article, and I'm going to share that with you today. Now, it's about Trader Joe's, and as you know, Trader Joe's is kind of this national grocery store, and they have a lot of really adamant shoppers and people who love Trader Joe's. In fact, our family, we live less than a mile from a Trader Joe's here in Washington, D.C., and I shop there fairly regularly. We don't buy all of our groceries there, but there's a lot of things we really like to buy there. We love their crunchy peanut butter that's natural, and it's made with peanuts pretty much. We love that. There's a few other things we buy there on a regular basis. It's a great store. The people there are friendly. And anytime a new community gets to Trader Joe's, right, it just explodes, and there's a lot of excitement about it, and there's a lot of buzz about it. And there was even an announcement a few months ago where certain cities that thought they were going to Trader Joe's were not going to get one, and there was almost this sense of mourning because they weren't going to get a Trader Joe's. And so Trader Joe's has a fairly dedicated following and people who love the store and go there. And if you've ever been to a Trader Joe's, right, it's a bit different from most grocery stores. They do things a bit differently, but it's a great place to go. And there's a lot of prepackaged food, but also a lot of fresh organic food that you can buy and make at home. And yeah, so there's a lot of people who have a lot of opinions on both sides about Trader Joe's, but a lot of it is positive, right? People really like Trader Joe's. And so I came across this article, and I'm going to share it right. I share it right now. It was in Taste. What the magazine was called, Taste. It was the story was actually picked up by one of the other economic websites. I forget which one, Fortune or something else. Anyway, it was referenced in another story. But the article is we need to talk about Trader Joe's. And the article states that it highlights a certain segment of chefs and people who work in the food industry who are kind of creating their own unique foods, whether it's a certain type of sauce or a certain prepackaged food that has a certain local flair or cultural flair. And there was one person, and I forget the name of the person in the article, who was highlighting that they created a food item that was selling well. They were selling it on their own, and Trader Joe's contacted them and said, hey, we are interested in possibly selling your recipe or your food under our store brand, and we'd love to have more conversation with you about it. And so this person put a lot of effort into communicating with Trader Joe's and sharing the recipe and going into those talks about it. And then they said things just went silent, and Trader Joe's didn't respond back to them. And they thought, well, okay, that was another missed opportunity. And then a few months later, they started getting calls from friends, people saying, hey, did you know that Trader Joe's is selling your food? And did you sign an agreement with Trader Joe's? And sure enough, they had mimicked what this chef had been cooking, mimicked the recipe, even mimicked some of the marketing for it, some of the spelling of the food. And we're now selling it under the store brand, but we're not paying this chef. And apparently there's a lot of chefs who have had a similar experience with Trader Joe's, where Trader Joe's will show some interest, will get more insight on their recipe, will even maybe taste it and try to work back and forth with the chef, and then kind of go dark, and then begin selling something very similar in their stores a few months or sometime later. And so the article just talks about that. It kind of talks about Trader Joe's has this reputation for doing that, and it's one of the dark sides of Trader Joe's. And so I read that, and I thought that's interesting, right? And so whenever I'm out reading my news and I'm kind of just getting stories and reading through my news, I usually take stories that kind of pique my interest and I put them off onto one of my other worksheets. And I'm like, this maybe is something I can bring up in a second cup of coffee. Maybe it's something I can go deep in, or maybe it's just something that's interesting. And so this morning, when I sat down to do my second cup of coffee, or to prepare for it, I knew I wanted to talk about what happened in Gaza with Israel attacking workers from the World Central Kitchen. And I thought I might want to bring up this issue about Trader Joe's. And so I started researching the Trader Joe's one first. I'd already put some thought into the Gaza article. And so I just kind of did some research on Trader Joe's and like who else is writing articles like this? Where else is this being said? And as I was just kind of researching Trader Joe's, I found some other interesting articles about Trader Joe's that I want to share with you. I'm just going to take you down the rabbit trail that I went down this morning. And so this was an article I found first in the New York Post. Now, normally I would not share an article about the New York Post. They are a very, very, very right-leaning website, right? And they're not very credible, especially for a lot of political news. But anyway, there was an article in the New York Post about Trader Joe's, but it was not a really controversial article. It was just saying out why Trader Joe's dashed dreams of grocery delivery. And they highlighted a podcast that Trader Joe's did in 2022 and some information from their website. Where, right, and most of us know this, over the course of the pandemic especially, online ordering and either picking up at the grocery store or having groceries delivered, that market has exploded. I mean, even we are, we do this in DC a lot. I will order almost once a week, order food from one of our local grocery stores. And we don't have them deliver it, but we do go and pick it up, and it just saves time from having to go into the store. It's things we buy fairly frequently. We actually have another service that does do deliveries for us. I've talked about them before. They're called the Rounds, and they bring, they basically bring food in sustainable packaging. And much more organic food. They deliver on bicycles or with electric vehicles. And so we've used them before. But so this whole market of online ordering, online and delivery of food has exploded in the past 4 or 5 years, especially during the pandemic. And Trader Joe's has pretty much been adamant they're not going to deliver. And even CNN wrote an article about it and why they were not going to deliver. And both these two articles reference both the podcast by Trader Joe's and the website, where they said, we don't want to increase prices by offering online delivery or online ordering and delivery, right? It completely changes the way we would operate. We'd have to start having warehouses, and we would have to, have a whole online app and everything else. And it would be a lot of overhead. And they said, free delivery is never free, right? There's always an expense there somewhere. And so even if you're getting free delivery, you're most likely paying for it somewhere else. And so Trader Joe's decided that they were not going to go online. And they basically said, our stores are the hallmark of who we are, right? That's who we are. That's our brand, is going into the store for the Trader Joe experience, right? Talking with the workers and the casual but friendly atmosphere and the different foods we offer. We try to make a very unique experience, and we're going to lose that if we go online. And so basically they're saying, we're not going to jump on the online bandwagon right now so we can maintain our brand. And that's a pretty positive thing, right? In a world where so much of our shopping now is less interactive, we're not going out, we're not meeting people. In some ways, it's very convenient, but it also takes us out of touch with our community and the people in our neighborhoods. And so I really respect, right, what Trader Joe's is doing and saying, no, we want to have the grocery shopping experience be an in-person human experience. And we think our stores are a very good way to do that. And so I respect that. Now, I had talked to my family knows we all shop at Trader Joe's. We all have our favorite things we get from Trader Joe's. And so I told my daughters about what happened, or what the article I read first about kind of what they do to some of these chefs. And so my daughter asked me this morning, she said, so are we going to stop shopping at Trader Joe's? I said, no, I don't think so. I think, right, there's always some positive and negatives about most companies. And again, my research today just demonstrated, I don't like what they're doing here to these chefs, and I don't support that, but I like the way they're trying to foster an in-person human experience that is being very quickly lost in so many other segments of our society. And so it was just kind of an interesting way to think about that. So as I was sitting there pondering these things, I started thinking about how stores like Trader Joe's and other stores and farmers markets here in DC, and the rounds that we get delivered and the ordering we do from the other grocery stores, right? All of these things. I started thinking about how our diet as a family has changed since we moved from the Navajo Nation almost a decade ago now. We moved in 2015 here to DC. And literally, there are 4 grocery stores within a mile of my house that I can walk. 5 actually grocery stores, probably within a mile and a quarter of my house that I could walk to. 3 stores, 2 that I walk to regularly, 1 weekly. I usually walk or go to Trader Joe's at least once a week or once every other week. And then there's a Whole Foods right near where my office is. And I walk there. I walk by it almost every day. And I actually started buying our fruits and vegetables there on a daily basis. Just so, again, I'm out in the community and we're buying fresh fruits and vegetables. There's also 2 farmers markets that are near our house, which we'll frequent those fairly regularly and try to buy organic fruits and vegetables from those, and even some organic meats from those farmers markets. And right, so and I just started thinking about how our diet over the past decade has radically changed. When we lived on the reservation, we ate a lot of processed foods. We ate a lot of McDonald's. We ate a lot of Burger King, right? We were in the car a lot, and we would stop by and order this fast food and get it, and we would eat, and it wasn't healthy, right? And on the reservation, diabetes is an absolute epidemic, just like it is around most places in the country. I mean, absolutely epidemic. People with their massive sodas and their processed foods, and right, where it's horrible for us. And over the past 10 years living in DC, the longer we've been here, the more we've gotten accustomed to buying better fruits and vegetables, varying our diet more, eating less fast food, cooking at home more, and just right, it's gotten so much easier. I mean, I shared the other day, over the past 9 months, I've lost 25 pounds. One of the ways I've done that is because we're eating healthier. We are eating more fresh fruits and vegetables. My daughter eats peppers and right, she asked me to buy fresh fruits and vegetables for her from the store, and she cooks them or even eats them raw, and she loves eating fresh fruits and vegetables, and I love that. We don't drink soda anymore. We drink 90% of what we put into our bodies liquid is either coffee. I'd say 95 for our family is either coffee or water. We don't buy juice. We don't buy soda. We drink some milk. We drink actually a fair amount of milk, but yeah, we drink a lot of water. And so it's just been fascinating how, as we've lived in a city that has a lot of grocery stores and a lot of options, almost by default, our eating has gotten healthier. And one of the reasons for that is the Navajo Nation is a food desert, right? So here's something shared on one of the government's websites about driving distance and food accessibility, a geospatial analysis of the food environment in the Navajo Nation and border towns. And this was published on July of 2022. And I'm going to share this link with you here. And it just lays out some information about how much the Navajo Nation is a food desert, right? We're 26,000 square miles, the Navajo Nation. If we were a state, we'd be the 40th largest state. We're larger than 9 other states. We have at least 173, 180, maybe even closer to 200,000 people living on the Navajo Nation today. 26,000 square miles, 180,000 people, and we have 14 grocery stores. And that's being very generous with what you would call a grocery store. 14 grocery stores to cover 26,000 square miles. Right? Even when we lived on the Navajo Nation, when we lived in the Hogan for those first 3 years, we were 35 miles, 6 of them over a dirt road, to get to the nearest grocery store. 35 miles. Even when we moved into Fort Defiance, where we lived for 8 years, we were 10 miles there, maybe 5 to 10 miles from the closest grocery store. And that was close, right? That was close. There are 2 grocery stores in Window Rock. And we were 5 to 7 miles from them. And so, yeah, the Navajo Nation is an absolute food desert. And there's a lot of stories out there. I'm going to share, this is a video on YouTube from a story NBC ran during the pandemic about food insecurity and the food desert on the Navajo Nation. Navajo Nation struggling to get access to healthy food among supply chain delays. And it went to one of these, what, again, we have to broaden the definition called a grocery store, serving 100-mile area, 100 square mile area. Most people are within 30, have to drive 30 miles just to get to this little tiny grocery store. And they said, yeah, we never get our full order, right? We are at the last rung of the supply chain. And so all of the big box stores, all of the larger markets, all the bigger towns, they get all their food, and whatever's left makes it out here. And our prices are much higher because A, we have to pay more to get them brought out here. B, we're a small store, so we have to increase we have to charge our higher prices so we can just keep the store open. Right? And it was one of these articles, I think it was this one, that said during this last wave of inflation, food prices on the Navajo Nation rose 14 to 15% more than they rose in most urban centers. So the entire nation experienced inflation, especially regarding food and other essentials. And food prices on the Navajo Nation inflated 15% more than they were inflating around the rest of the country. So not only are we driving these vast differences to get to a store, we're paying much higher prices once we actually get there. And they talked with people, entrepreneurs on our Navajo Nation about what are they doing? How are they coping with this? And they shared, yeah, this goes back to the 1860s. This goes back to, they didn't say Abraham Lincoln, or this goes back to the Long Walk when we were removed from our land, right? And the entire goal was to wipe us out and to remove us from our land and to make life harder for us. Even when we came back after the treaty in 1868, right? We were still, and this has been the systemic oppression of the United States towards our people for 150 years. And I was so proud that so many of the people who were interviewed for this story connected the struggles we're facing today with the systemic, institutionalized oppression of our people over the past 150 years. It's not just because we live in a remote area. It's because this was the plan of the country to wipe us out, even after they brought us back from the concentration camp, the death camp, the Bosque Redondo, where Abraham Lincoln sent us to be killed. And I love the fact that they connected it back to that. And then I was really struck because I was watching the NBC News story, and at the end of the story, there were two journalists who were talking, and one was the journalist who was relaying the story. The other was a journalist who was kind of interviewing them, kind of the in-house voice, and the other one was out in the field, and they were just talking back and forth. And so the journalist on the field was kind of laying out the food desert and the reality and the difficulty of finding food and getting food there. And then they ended that segment by saying something to the effect, but everybody I talked to said they wouldn't want to live anywhere else. And the person who was in house said, that's great to hear, or something to that effect. I forget exactly what they said. And I thought that's how they made it all right. Right? We just talked about this massive food insecurity, this incredibly sparse food desert. The fact that they are paying prices 15% higher than the rest of the nation is even paying as their prices go up too. We've talked about how this is a systemic problem going back to the ethnic cleansing and genocide of our people. And they end it with isn't that great that they love to live there? Just dismissing the entire point of the story, which is this is a travesty and one that's largely being ignored. And even when it's being highlighted, it's still being dismissed as, well, at least they want to be there. Of course we want to be there. It's our home. We have ties to that land. Those are our 4 sacred mountains. Our creation story takes. Of course we want to be there. So anyway, that got me thinking even more so about the systemic and institutional oppression around things like food. So we've gone from the war in Gaza to the Trader Joe's article to making shopping the human experience to recognizing the nature of the ongoing systemic institutionalized oppression against Native peoples in the food desert, and then our nation largely just dismissing it, even though they're hearing about these horrors. And then I was thinking about that, and I got back to the New York Times, to the story about the world's central kitchen workers who were killed by Israeli forces in an airstrike. I'm going to share another story with you. This is in the New York Times. And this was an absolute horrific act that Israel did this. Whether it was intentional or an accident, right? World Central Kitchen coordinated with the Israeli government, told them where they were going. They had their agenda. Their cars were clearly marked as humanitarian aid workers and World Central Kitchen on the roofs of their cars, right? You had to know. They made every effort to give their location and their routes and their plans and their agenda and everything else to the Israeli military. And they still got bombed. And Israel dismissed it as basically saying, well, we feel bad about it. This is what happens in wars. What really brought this home for me was the way I learned about this story is Rachel, my wife, read about it first. And she said, Mark, I didn't tell you this, but a week or so ago, after hearing all the reports of what's going on in Gaza, I wanted to help support it. And so I made a donation, from our family to the World Central Kitchen because they are there on the ground trying to feed people in Gaza. And so we donated to the World Central Kitchen. And she said, today I just read that their convoy was bombed by Israel and they were killed. I started reading the World Central Kitchen's website, and it was started by Chef Jose Andres with his wife back in maybe 2010, maybe even earlier. It started after the earthquake in Haiti. And on their story page about the World Central Kitchen, it says, World Central Kitchen started with a simple idea at home with my wife, Patricia. The idea was when people are hungry, send in cooks. Not tomorrow, today. Chef Jose Andres believes that food is a human right, a basic human right, which it is. And he is using his abilities, his influence, everything he has to bring food to people who are hungry. Their organization, the World Central Kitchen, has been involved in humanitarian crises around the globe. And on their website, there's a link to an opinion piece that Chef Jose Andres wrote after the bombing of his organization's vehicles and their people in Gaza. It was published in the New York Times, and it's titled, Let People Eat. I'm going to share it here, and I welcome you, I invite you, I encourage you to read it. It is an amazing opinion piece. Chef Jose Andres talks about how his organization, the World Central Kitchen, was in Israel after Hamas attacked Israel and took hostages, and they fed people in Israel. He talked about how World Central Kitchen is in Gaza and has been in Gaza, feeding millions of people. He absolutely condemned what happened, but he kept the humanity of the Israeli people and of the Palestinians at the forefront of everything he wrote. It was unbelievably beautiful. And he basically said, we're better than this. We are all better than this. So if you're feeling outraged, like I am feeling about what Israel did, and outrage is the proper response to what Israel did to the 7 workers, and I'm just going to name them. I'm sorry if I'm not going to pronounce all their names correctly. I'm going to do my best. Saif Eden, Issam Ayed Abu Taha, John Chapman, Jacob Flickinger, Zomi Frankham, James Henderson, James Kirby, and Damien Sobel. Those are the World Central Kitchen workers who were killed by Israel in Gaza as they were trying to deliver food. And outrage, again, is the only response, the primary response we need to have at this. This was an absolute outrage that Israel did this. And I encourage you to read Jose Andres' opinion piece in the New York Times, Let People Eat, because his response, keeping the humanity of everybody involved at the forefront of his mind, was nothing short of beautiful. Nothing short of beautiful. I shared earlier the link to the World Central Kitchen's website. I'm going to share another link to their website right now, where this was happened right after the bombing or the attack, where they call for an investigation. And I absolutely agree there needs to be an investigation, and Israel needs to be held accountable for what they did. They absolutely need to be. And the United States, not only do we need to call for that investigation, but we can't be a part of it, right? We have just as much blood on our hands as Israel does. We're giving them the guns. We need to have this investigated, and the United States of America has no integrity to be involved in that investigation. We are hypocrites in this conflict. And until we stop sending military aid to Israel, we have no authority in this matter. But it needs to be looked at. So anyway, my relatives, that's how I got from Trader Joe's to food insecurity to the killing of aid workers in Gaza. And that's kind of an emotional, long journey. But I thank you for joining me on that journey this morning. right? I remember it's easy to be outraged. But if our response comes only out of our outrage, because our outrage will often lead us to see things as binary or very simply just black and white. And when we do that, we forget the humanity of the people involved. It becomes too easy to make both the victims and the perpetrators less than human. And the solutions become so much more difficult and challenging when we actually keep everybody's humanity at the forefront of our minds. We're going into a political process right now, and there's a lot of debate back and forth between Biden and Trump. I personally think both of them should withdraw. I've said that before. I don't think either of them have the integrity or the right or the vision to lead our country at this time. But unfortunately, they're what we have at the moment. And I've been thinking a lot about how do I respond to this, because I don't like either of these men's visions, right? Trump wants to take us backwards. Literally, he wants to take us backwards. And Biden doesn't want to move forward. He wants to keep the status quo. He expresses outrage at things, but he doesn't, he just allows the violence and the oppression to happen. He's nicer about it, but he's are more compassionate about it, but he still allows it to happen because that is what's required to make the status quo. And it made me think, because so what do we do, right? How do we not vote? Do we protest? Do we call our Congress members if we had them, right? What do we do? And I think what we do is we have to train better leaders. Most of our leaders, and I'm going to just be frank, are cowards. They're cowards to speak the truth, and they're cowards to stand up for what's right and wrong. And that's how we train them. And if we want better leaders, we have to do a better job of training leaders better at a very young age. Training them how to stand on principle and not what's popular. Training them how to listen to the voices of the marginalized and not just the voices of people with money. Right? We have to train people. I can tell you, after working so hard for the past 20 years to keep my voice independent, that doesn't just happen. Right? There are so many ways that your voice gets diluted and softened and moved off to the margins and pushed down gently and severely at different times. And if you want to keep your voice independent, you have to do that intentionally, because if you don't, it will be redirected. So if we want better leaders, we have to start training young people to be better leaders. Because they're not just going to appear generally. So those are, I again, I don't have a solution yet for this election. I personally, I think both Donald Trump and Joe Biden need to withdraw. Neither of them have the integrity or the vision to lead our country in the crisis we're facing right now. And I'm going to continue to call for that. But what we also need to be investing in younger leaders and working to train them how to stand better and more strongly on principle. And how to do what, again, Jose Andres did so beautifully in his opinion piece, which is keep the humanity of everybody involved at the forefront of our minds. So anyway, my relatives, those are my thoughts. I hope your second cup of coffee is as good as mine has been. I hope you appreciate this dialogue. Susan, Yá'át'ééh, thank you for joining today. Fayanete Pierce, thank you for joining. Steve, Yá'át'ééh, thank you for joining today. Paul Phillips, Yá'át'ééh, and greetings here in Kenya. Thank you for joining today. George, Yá'át'ééh, thank you for joining today. I'm so grateful for everyone who's taken some moments to join me for the second cup of coffee. I welcome you to share out this podcast. Earlier this week, I was interviewed on SiriusXM on the Karen Hunter show. And she has a fairly broad audience. We talked about the trauma of white America, and she allowed me to share my website. And there was a lot of interest after that show in both my book, both from my website as well as on Amazon. I saw the sales rankings there go really high after that interview was over. And what this tells me, right, is there's a lot of people who are interested in this. They just don't know about it. They just don't know these conversations are taking place, and these resources, not just my resources, but other resources are out there. So I want to encourage you to share this podcast with people, share this live stream with people, share the resources I have out there, let people know about the book I've written, let people know about other books and other things that are out there that I share on this podcast. There's so many ways that we can get the information out there. If you want to buy signed copies of my book, you can do that on my website. You can buy either a single copy or you can buy a 10-book special. And when you buy the 10-book special for my website, I give your book study a virtual Q&A, 45-minute virtual Q&A that you can schedule with me up to a year after. A great resource to introduce people to the doctrine of discovery and what is this about is the TEDx talk I gave. It's doing very well. It has over 300,000 views on the YouTube channel. A lot of resources out there. Of course, I'm still on Patreon. Patreon is one of my biggest platforms right now to bring in some funding and support so I can keep my voice as independent as possible. And I'm doing things there every week to try and deepen the conversation on Patreon. I welcome you to join me there. There's a lot of resources. If you want to share this podcast, we have my second cup of coffee on all the podcast sites. You can share it out there. Sometimes I call it my second cup of coffee to go because you can download the audio and listen to it there. But yeah, there's a lot of resources, my relatives. I'm so grateful you joined me today. Thank you for taking some time to be a part of this conversation. Thank you for joining me for my second cup of coffee. Walk in beauty, my relatives. And may we all learn how to walk in beauty together. Shah and Hakone.